folks. Welcome back to the Cyber Ranges track. It's great to see you all again. We've got a really neat session. I was just telling the folks that are about to present to you that this is one of my favorite sessions of the whole track, because we're going to hear from some people who create cyber ranges and CTFs, and we're going to get into their minds and kind of understand how they do it and what they're thinking about. We're going to have two presenters. I'll introduce one, then he'll do his talk, and then I'll introduce the second. If you have any questions or commentary, you could type it into Zoom, or you could put it directly into the particular Slack room we have set aside for this, which is hallway-Elgee-McNamee. Now, let me introduce to you Chris Elgee. With a penchant for puzzles, Chris is a challenge developer and penetration tester for CounterHack. How about that? He was the project lead for CounterHack for Core NetWar 6, contributes to many other projects. He has a leadership role in the Holiday Hack Challenge, which has just been delightful. He also holds a commission with the Army National Guard and has served in roles from international partnership management to red team leadership on large-scale exercises. I first met Chris, 5 years ago, working on a large-scale exercise, and I was just so impressed with him, and now I have the honor of working with him. He's on our team over at CounterHack, and he does really incredible work. So without further ado, let's give a round of applause to Chris Elgee. Yay, Chris! I think you're on mute, Chris.
Okay, how about now? My mute button went away. Matt Hussein would make fun of me because I'm running from Linux, and it's always something strange. So yeah, my name is Chris. Thanks, Ed, so much for that introduction. I do love making these games, and Simon and I are going to be going through this really back and forth. So I'll kind of go through the agenda, and then Ed, if you would introduce Simon going into the next slide. But what he and I are going to go through with this talk are first, why do we do these challenges? Who are they for? And then how do we shape the challenges? And we want to shape them to make them engaging and to make them educational. We'll talk for a bit about storyline, whether and why you should have a storyline with challenges. Ed talked a bit about that earlier today. And then we'll do a bit of the kind of the nitty gritty behind the scenes of the dev stuff that has to go on the QA. And then lastly, we'll close with the secret sauce for what makes a really good challenge.
And you know what makes for a really good challenge? Having secrets and teasing people. I see what you do. Anyway, let me introduce Simon McNamee. Simon is an incredible guy. I first met him, I think it was about 1.5 years ago, where he TA'd for my 560 course at SANS Orlando. And he was fantastic. First of all, he was a lot of fun to be around, but technically very gifted. He works on James Line's team, developing really high quality challenges and cyber range events. He was instrumental in the development of Jupiter rockets and so many other things that are going on with SANS CTFs. The guy's spectacular. So anyway, happy to introduce you folks. Take it away.
Awesome. So when we first start looking at sort of building these ranges, like Chris said, we need to look at why we're actually building them. So what skills are we trying to teach? Are we trying to teach a sort of skill indeed, or is it going to be built as a competitive environment? We're looking at kind of what is the end state of it. Are we trying to sort of build team cohesion? Are we running it as a business unit? Are we bringing sort of a group of analysts in to run through some blue team exercises? Or are we just trying to build sort of ad hoc teams on the day and just playing for fun and sort of running through that?
And then you'll notice too, as we go through that, we get these chunks of tweets popping up. Ed mentioned this thread earlier today, where someone asked, why are CTFs bad? And we're going to kind of thread these through because they make for kind of honestly useful feedback that are from people who play and build CTFs. And you'll see a couple today from Mark Blackmer. And indeed, they are all a bit different. So target audience. There are so many different people in the industry. There are different people trying to get into the industry. So each of these CTFs have totally different targets, right? Something like a NetWars tournament is targeted at people who are at SANS conferences. So people who are probably already in the industry or at the beginning of their journey in the industry, maybe. Whereas something like Jupiter rockets has a different focus. And then And then, you see here that Merv Sahan, thank you so much for your comment about how some people think that that everybody in InfoSec must want to not sleep and they just want to compete, and that's not their preference. But some people think it's that CTFs are the esports of the community. I think that's more my view, but obviously I'm biased. And the mute button, Simon, it got you too.
Buttons are hard. Yeah, I think I fall more on the kind of enjoying the competitive side, and I think that might somewhat be reflected in sort of Jupiter rockets and what you can see in there. It's definitely aimed at sort of more skilled people with experience. It's potentially not all that useful as a sort of learning tool if you're just new to the industry or just trying to sort of try CTF out for the first time. But hopefully, if you've got a bit of experience and you know some of the skills that you need, it's a really good, fun, competitive environment. And yeah. So when we're looking at this and we're trying to work out sort of where we need to land, we need to sort of work out where on the spectrum of sort of skills from beginner to ninja we actually want to be targeting our challenges and the range and kind of things around it. Ideally, you want to maybe be aiming to cover an array from sort of maybe beginner to moderately difficult challenges. You're probably not going to hit all of them. It's very difficult to do so. But you want to try and have that range in there. One of the big things that you sort of really, and we try to do it, is make sure that everybody scores at least some points. If you get some people who turn up and are find themselves very quickly out of their depth, they should never leave scoring 0 points. If it's too hard, everything's too hard, you switch people off, and so potentially if it's too easy, you run the opposite risk and it can become sort of boring. Finding that balance is hard, and so I imagine Chris has got some input on that.
Yeah, it definitely is, and sometimes there are tricks you can play, right? Like sometimes you can make shortcuts so that the pros can just answer this medium hard challenge to skip some of the easier ones, but that's kind of hard to build in. And how do you measure the points for that? I do want to grab Yar's comment there at the bottom that whatever you're doing in a CTF, hopefully you're not just doing the things you're good at, and you are kind of growing your skill base a bit. Maybe that's using a journal of CTFs and challenges and things you're using, but do try to grow as you're playing these things. So as far as shaping the challenges themselves, we built this XY axis of time versus skill required to accomplish different things, and I think anybody who's played has experienced things in all different parts of this spectrum, right? In the bottom left, you've got host name. What is the host name of the device you're on? As long as you can get a VM up and running, which is not assumed, which shouldn't be assumed, but as long as you can get on, then there are simple challenges that anyone can do and do relatively quickly, especially with some hinting. And we'll talk more about hinting in a little bit. Going all the way to the far right end there along the bottom of stack-based buffer overflow. If you've been practicing for OSCP or something, a simple stack-based buffer overflow is going to be pretty quick for you to do, but it does require a higher level of skill. Now, going up the y-axis to the zip turducken, I'm actually going to issue an apology to anybody who's played Networks Tournament 6 and been frustrated by the challenge. By gum, it's gum, because I'm that guy. I made the it was I don't know, it was like gzip and a tar and a whatever, and then it's encoded a few different ways. And my intent of building that was to kind of walk people through different ways of packing and encoding and decoding data. But I understand that does take some time and it can be frustrating, and my heart goes out to you.
Yeah, and so looking at this, and Chris did a good job of kind of showing the difficulty along the curve there. There's almost a hidden axis that should be on here of kind of reward. And when you're kind of looking at this, as you're moving in, the reward for a challenge should also reflect the amount of effort that's put in. Whether it's sort of towards the left, it's a beginner challenge, but it's quite difficult, it takes a lot of time, or whether it's sort of hard and requires very specific skills. Making sure the reward is appropriate as well while you're trying to define these is quite an important thing. So then that sort of moves us on to the sort of shape and direction of a challenge. Or is it a guided one, much like if you've played the sort of NetWars mini missions with the split terminals, where you can sort of step through, and it's almost guided step-by-step challenges that progressively get harder. And I know quite a lot of you have played Jupiter Rockets sort of over the last day or so, towards the other side where it's like, ready, go, here's an environment. And you're given very little or potentially no guidance at all. And trying to find where to fall on that spectrum can be very, very difficult. So guided's very useful as a teaching tool if you're trying to build skills in people, or maybe it's a new concept technology and you kind of want to build a really cool challenge around it, then guided is probably the way to go. Unguided and sort of more open range, go and find the things, is generally more useful as sort of a skill check. I've seen it used a lot more sort of in that regard.
Yep. So again, it gets back to the training objective, right? It depends what you're trying to teach people and what people want to learn as to how guided or unguided a challenge is. One way to kind of bring people along is with successive challenges. And here's an example from the Holiday Hack of 2018, where Chris Davis and I did a talk on HTTP2, because it's a new technology that we had a training objective. We wanted people to learn this tech. So we did this talk. And then I had a very simple terminal challenge where people were curling with HTTP2, and that's a curling stone at the top there. And then Chris had a much more involved challenge where here's an HTTP2 PCAP, and his talk went through how to decode that and decrypt that given the right keys. So it kind of brought people along.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of the biggest thing with successive challenges. If you're doing a new or sort of difficult technique or tool, having that allows you to break it up into those discrete chunks. It stops it becoming too difficult for maybe someone who has the skills but doesn't know it. If you break it up into those steps of kind of do this, then this, then this, oh, and look at that, you've actually solved this big thing over here. It helps to break it up and sort of almost make it a little bit easier. So then that takes us on to hints. Hints are really, really useful for sort of taking that, I don't know how to solve this challenge, I'm stuck, I've hit a wall, and getting somebody through that challenge and turning it into a positive. So a solve using hints is kind of just as valuable and exciting to a player, especially somebody who's new or maybe pushing the boundaries of their skills, as sort of a solve without hints for somebody who, is a ninja in that area. They refuse to take the hints. Some people do that. They'll play through sort of net wars and refuse to take any hints. So rather trying to grab a person than take the hints in the game. But so taking those hints doesn't detract from the sort of learning and the fun from the actual solve itself.
Yeah, and Simon and I have both been that guy, right? Where we just beat our head against the wall and won't take the hint, and then finally we do, and we're like, oh, I was going down the complete wrong path. So sometimes we have them, like in Net Wars, we'll have the hints where you click and take a hint, and then there's no point penalty, but it does end up being a tiebreaker, or it could be. It usually isn't. At the same time, Chris Davis has really spearheaded this split screen terminal thing that's been fantastic for us in the mini Net Wars, where we kind of almost force feed hints, right? Like they sort of come in context, and then you can write at the terminal, ask for different help, and get those there, and that's not tracked. And I think when we're not tracking hints, people tend to be more likely to take them, but I can't say that we've honestly measured that. But hints can be, like Simon said, just a great way to bring people through, make sure they're learning and moving forward. Now, for realism, realism is huge, and as much as you can get it, the better. I'll drop Ed's name again. He was talking today about, the difference between a range and a CTF is it the level of realism? Well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But whichever you're playing, whatever you want to call it, realism helps. So you can see here a shot of a soldier and a civilian partner looking at a simulated SCADA box at a cyber Yankee exercise. You can see in the bottom right, Cyber City, which is this massive miniature town that's actually in its basement that has real SCADAs and PLCs underneath it running. And with those pieces, you can make some really realistic challenges. But we can't always do that, right? Like we would love to make it so that whenever you solve a problem and get a flag, that a centrifuge spins too fast and breaks, but it's just not realistic. And the time you put into making something super realistic with all the fake data is time you could be spending adding more challenges to a CTF. So it's always a trade-off.
Yeah, and we've tried adding those things in and adding sort of almost kinetic elements to these challenges. We've had robotic arms and things like that. And while it's very, very cool, the amount of time, effort, and sort of misery that went into making that actually work compared to what we could have sort of spent on sort of making some more awesome challenges and content. It's a difficult balance to strike. It's very, very cool, but it's not always worth it. So then we carrying on the shape of a challenge and defining how we're building them. We ideally want to make sure that the challenge is solvable in maybe more than one way. You want to try and avoid sort of falling into that trap of sort of guess what color underwear I was wearing last Thursday. And so one of the things we do, and I'll touch on it a little bit more later, is when we're building the challenges, is sort of we'll make sure that somebody else tests it without the solution, just to make sure that it's kind of one, solvable, and two, to try and identify those alternate paths. Sometimes challenges are really, really obvious. Those of you sort of who've come across those, where you sit there, you bang your head against it for sort of hours maybe, and then when you find out, you're like, oh, that was it. Those of you doing Jupiter rockets today, you might have done or tried to do the sandwich shop challenge. There's actually a few ways of solving that, and every time we run this, somebody seems to find a new way. One of the coolest we've seen so far was someone on the cyber discovery program in the UK. It was a 15-year-old who actually cross-referenced phone numbers against local businesses and found it that way. That was awesome, and just having those extra paths in there is really, really cool.
Yeah, and we never want to really pigeonhole you down one path. I mean, unless we're trying to teach a specific path. Like, decrypting HTTP2 in Wireshark or something like that. We want there to be other ways to do it, but it can be difficult. So, here on screen is just an example of one of the blocks of hints from NetWars Tournament 6, where, hey, you need to decrypt this thing. You can do it from Bash with OpenSSL, or you can do it from Python. I'm sure it can be done with Perl. Ron Bose would use Ruby, but he's kind of mad like that. Yeah, and we don't want to force you down one path whenever we can avoid that. So I am guilty of this. I'm guilty of playing the game of guess what the challenge developer is thinking. Again, another apology from Chris. For anybody who played the Mini NetWars Mission 3 and did the snowball fight challenge, it was basically a very similar game to Battleship, right? Where you shoot back and forth and you're trying to hit the enemy's snow forts. And then the last piece of that challenge was a 3-part challenge. The last piece was to defeat the enemy with one shot and submit the flag. And then to make hints here, we say, hey, well, find the enemy's coordinates, and then shoot with WSCAT or Dev Console, whatever. And then how would you defeat the enemy with one shot? So it was a bit of a riddle, a bit of wordplay, which I recognize honestly favors English native speakers whenever you do wordplay, which bums me out because I like writing poems. But the idea was, you're not shooting at 0-2 or 0-1 or 0-0. To shoot the enemy, you need to shoot at 0-1. So the learning objective here was familiarize people with the game so that they can then read WebSockets and finish challenge 2, and then write WebSockets to finish challenge 3. The intent wasn't to frustrate people with a riddle there, but that happens sometimes.
Yeah, and we've been guilty of it too. We've built sort of a challenge where sort of the goal of it was to run the sort of password spraying attack against a web service. And the password was intentionally in the sort of top X most common passwords. The issue was, if you say to someone it's in the list of the top X most common passwords, everybody has a different list. So it very quickly stopped being a sort of solve this challenge and teaching this skill and sort of doing that, and it became guess which word list I had on hand at the time when I built this. And that becomes super frustrating for sort of players. And so similarly, if you go too far down a sort of technical rabbit hole and you're doing super awesome technical backflips, that's also really cool, but can be super frustrating because unless someone can get into your mindset, you often can't solve that challenge. It very quickly becomes sort of, guess what was in my mind as I was building this, and that it's not a good experience for anybody.
Yeah, what did Simon eat for breakfast this morning?
Cool. So once we're looking at this, we need to start thinking about sort of context and what's going to tie all these challenges together, whether it's in a sort of CTF, a range, or what's the environment going to look like, and the sort of story that's going to be surrounding that. So it's really important for a few reasons. One of the big ones is it keeps players engaged. It keeps them engaged. It helps guide them through the challenges. It ties things together into a sort of logical block rather than being a just discrete series of, hey, solve this thing. Oh, and here's another thing. One thing to really, really watch out for, and I know Chris will touch on this as well, is when you're sort of building these storylines, be very careful not to include real people, places, companies. It's so easy to do by accident. And again, those playing Jupiter Rockets will have probably found out that the headquarters is allegedly at RAF Henlow, which was supposed to have closed down. They decided not to close that after we'd written the story, built the challenge, and was about a week away from actually running it. So it's actually still a live base. Very little we can do about that, but it's so easy to fall into that trap.
Yeah. Yeah, but yeah, like Simon said, stories are so important. Humans love stories. We're engaged by stories, and one of the neat benefits in a capture the flag is it gives you context, right? If you're in your own SOC and you're looking at your own data, you already have context. You know what normal looks like and what looks strange. If you're doing a pen test, hopefully you've already done your recon and you know what things should look like, and you know what key assets you're going after. You've got that context. When you drop into like a Net Wars or a Jupiter Rockets and you've only got a few hours, we need to jumpstart that context. And one kind of shortcut way to do that is with stories, right? We pull on Santa or Willy Wonka or Star Wars, because people know if they see a TIE fighter that's bad, or if they see an Oompa Loompa, then it may be good, maybe suspicious, but they've got that context. Artwork can also be super helpful, but a lot of us are nerds that can't do that. That's why we have people like Josh Wright and Evan Booth. And then as far as stories go, when it comes to military context, a lot of times we will actually we'll invent bad guys like the Krasnovians rather than use a particular nation, because that gets into we very quickly get into an area where we consider it classified, and then we can't have civilian partners in the room, and that's basically no fun for anybody. And yeah, Mark Blackmer again, big fan of the storylines. I follow him now on Twitter. All right, making the sausage, and I think this is Dev. So yeah, Simon.
Yeah, so obviously we've looked at kind of the why, but one of sort of the most difficult parts is the how. How do you turn those ideas and those best practices and those kind of things you really, really want to kind of get out there and get people playing with into something tangible? And that starts with kind of what you can see here. You need to define those concepts. Whether that's throwing a lot of ideas into a sort of shared notepad, sort of getting all that sort of thoughts down. When we're building our challenges, actually have a sort of full software development lifecycle set up. We're using sort of Jira to track things. We've got a full workflow with review stages in there. So when challenges are tested, they're moved along, and sort of things get moved around in Git and things like that. It's quite an involved process, and it's set up because you need to kind of have that structure in place, because with so many moving parts and the sort of potential for just a different library and a different environment breaking things, it's really important to have that structure in place.
Yeah, if you listen to the panel just a few minutes ago, Jeff McJunkin talked about how the U.S. military appreciated that the range at an STX didn't go down, and it was the first time they'd seen that. And my goodness, I've been in that military range enough times, and it does go down. So, like Simon said, stability matters, and we're trying to get more into containers and targets as code, so that's easier to iterate and to bring things back up from a safe state. QA is a huge piece of anything now. We have things like solver scripts, so we can have something going constantly through levels 3 and 4 in Net Wars, checking to make sure that targets are still spitting out the right flags and that things still work. And then perhaps most importantly here is feedback. We get a lot of feedback from each other, and then from players. Before we started tournament 7, we asked SANS for all the evals from tournament 6, and we got them by the boatload, and we read through them, and that really helped inform how we shaped challenges going forward. So no zip turduckens, I promise, in 7. And then I love this one about basically the tweet is, hey, CTFs make it easier than the real world. Sometimes the real world is actually easier than a CTF. If you listen to Security Weekly this past Thursday, they talked about that exact thing. How sometimes we at CounterHack will do a pen test and we'll find some flaw. Usually it's Ron Bowes because he's a wizard, and we'll laugh about it and say we can't put this in a CTF because people will just say that's not realistic. So yes and no. Sometimes CTFs are easier than real world, and sometimes not. Flags, we need to have you input something when you solve a challenge. There are exceptions, like sometimes with the holiday hack, when we have a WEDI terminal inside your browser, we can actually pass completion tokens up to the server and then just automatically give you credit. And that's great, but in so many cases we can't, right? With Simon's example about the, finding the phone number for the sandwich shop, like there's no way we can, unless we're putting like, spyware on your computer, we won't know when you found that. So we have to look for flags. And it feels like breaking the fourth wall. It feels like we're giving up a bit of the compelling, engaging nature of a challenge when we break the fourth wall with things like flags, right? NetWars, curly brace, some flag here. But it makes it very clear, especially if there are penalties for wrong answers, right? When the question is super clear and what a flag is super clear, then we don't feel too bad penalizing people for just trying to brute the question engine.
Yeah, and sort of we're a little bit guilty of it, and I know we've caused some sort of frustrations with the players over the last day or so. One of the big things with the flags is making sure it's very, very clear when you found what you're looking for. Whether it is the sort of fourth wall breaking curly brace format, which can be nothing but a flag, apart from that one challenge in Jupiter Rockets, which I know some people have had fun with. Sort of looking for service names and version numbers, depending on the tools, you might get a different result. So that's when sort of things like maybe having regex matching in there, trying to create a little bit more leeway, trying to make it a little bit more sort of friendly and sort of fault tolerant. Is something that's really, really, really a valuable thing to build in if you can. I'm not a huge fan of penalizing players for getting it wrong. I appreciate sometimes you'll want to, especially if you're running the game as sort of, maybe it's a high stakes competition using it as a skill check, but if it's a just for fun CTF, I'm not a huge fan of the penalties. I don't know if that's just because I'm sore, because I've been hurt by them before and I'm a little bit scared of them now, but yeah, I'm not a huge fan of them. I try and avoid it. It's not something I like to do, but I do see where they have their place.
Yep, and we do charge penalties in NetWars generally. We don't in Holiday Hack, and yeah, there are definitely different ways to cut that. And just a quick note on hiding strings. A lot of players like mounting a VM as a drive and then just grepping through for NetWars curly brace. So we have to do a lot of things to, this is the making the sausage, right? We have to hide strings sometimes, either by piping them through lolcat or encoding them a specific way, just to try to get people not to take away alternate solve paths, but to kind of force them down to at least try the technical path, the technical intent of the challenge. So, so Robert Volpe plays for fun and with friends. That's fantastic. We think that's absolutely the way you should do that. And sorry, back to Simon.
Yeah. So support something that you really, really need to think about. How you're going to provide that varies massively depending on the sort of event or indeed the game you're running. Something like this, where we've got thousands of people playing games all over the world, and it really has been from all over the world. It's been awesome. It's really difficult to support that. I mean, even with something like Slack, trying to keep track of that is quite difficult. TAs, live and virtual, help. And I know you guys do email support for things like Holiday Hack. It's a tricky one to try and solve. Reverts and automatic reverts, or maybe sort of user requested reverts, are another thing you can look at. The Jupiter Rockets range is monitored quite extensively, and when a service goes down, it will try and automatically fix it. If it can't, then it'll just sort of replace the box. it's not always possible to do that. Sometimes it makes sense to sort of maybe give the players a button, something like in Hack the Box or those sort of things where you can request a revert and it might pop it up to any other connected players and sort of like, hey, player X wants to reset this machine. Do you have a problem with that? Is it broken? They're all things you can think about to sort of try and make the experience a little bit less frustrating when something does go wrong. Because often, especially with more difficult challenges, it can be quite hard to tell whether the challenge is broken or you're just doing it wrong.
Yeah, and as far as things breaking too, we can kind of get ahead of the TA support curve. The really neat thing's been happening with mini net wars, and that's that the people who are building the challenges are then immediately being the TAs for the challenge, which for people like Chris Davis and myself, who don't often get to be on the support side, we've learned a lot of things about how to kind of, I apologize for the term, but how to player-proof some of the challenges. If you played Tournament 6 early on and you had to send some JSON through the filter program, you're intended to vertical pipe send it through filter, but a lot of people just by typing too fast or just unfamiliar with command redirects would greater than pipe it into filter and overwrite this program, and there was no way to get it back. So one of the sayings we have now, at least at CounterHack, is chatter all the things. So we set the immutable bit on things like filter now, so that so the players can't stomp that and don't get stuck there, because the intent of the challenge is not just to do the commands right, but it's we don't want people breaking things. So if everyone's ready, we're going to give you the secret sauce. If there's one tip we can share about how to make a successful CTF or cyber range, how to make it compelling and awesome, it is this, and it's teamwork. You see here most of the CounterHack team at the CounterHack International headquarters. This is us getting together. We used to do this twice a year. We kind of do it virtually now, but any good challenge you've played has come from a team of people. Somebody came up with an idea. Somebody else maybe said, hey, that's great, but what if this? Somebody else maybe did the art for it. Someone wrote a silly elf poem for it, right? And then you've got the marketing person who made sure people could hear about it. And then you have Lynn, wonderful Lynn, who pays us all and keeps us all straight. And she's the logistics arm of CounterHack, and we absolutely we adore her. So if nothing else, it's all about teamwork.
Yeah, I think Chris absolutely hits the nail on the head there, and it's critical to have those different viewpoints and skills and experience sort of all throughout the process, all the way from kind of the challenge design and sort of inception right through to delivery. Having those extra sort of eyes and thoughts on it it's irreplaceable.
And hopefully Archie Posidio is dead on, and that you do get addicted to these. We think they're really we think they're wonderful, but we're biased. We absolutely will take some questions in a minute. I see Geek Girl's got a great one, but just as some parting shots, please play, right? And if you want to go and compete, that's awesome. If you want to just go and sit in the back and just play around and not get on the scoreboard, that's fine. But by all means, play and try something that you haven't done before.
Yeah, and if you're a little bit hesitant to play, try and buddy up with someone. Even if it's not a team event and you're going to play as individuals, and someone doesn't mind sort of helping you along and nudging you along, go, because you'll learn some new and awesome things. You'll have fun and you'll meet people. So
I do see this question from Geek Girl. I don't think it's at random. She asks, what are our favorite parts of writing challenges? I'm not sure about Simon, but for me, I think it's the end of the process. It's when you're in the room, when you get to see someone have that aha moment, right? When they finally solve it. It wasn't an ugh, that's what you were thinking. That's what I was supposed to get. It's oh, I get that now. That makes sense. I followed the path and I learned something new and I scored the points. That for me just totally makes the whole experience.
Yeah, no, it is. It's that excitement and the kind of almost realization that they can do it. It's really nice to see.
Yep, I'm with you on that. I'll go through the questions with you guys so we can have sort of an interactive dialogue. They're great questions, but I would like to answer that question myself too. My favorite part about making a challenge is when I've made it and I've got it, and I'm the only one that's got it, and the whole rest of the world doesn't have it, and I'm ready to put the baby out there. That it blows my mind. And then people start working on it, and that's good too, when you see your first person solve it and all that. But it's just that moment before, it's ecstasy. So that's for me. All right, so let's see. We got some other questions. Anonymous attendee says, "Oh, that's a curling stone. I thought it was an ornament." Yeah, me too. I had no idea. This next one's really good question, though. It's from DB. How do you measure the value of each challenge afterwards? And I think he means quality by that, he or she. The number of solves, the number of attempts, the time spent per challenge, player feedback. How do you tell if you did good?
I'm going to pass that right to Simon.
Nice.
Excellent. Thank you. I think looking at the stats like the number of solves, maybe number of solves as a percentage of overall attempts is useful. But honestly, the best way of kind of measuring the sort of value and quality of the challenge is player feedback. We need the feedback, the good, the bad, the ugly. If you like it, if you don't like it, tell us. Because if what you're saying makes sense, we'll change it. We're not precious with our ideas. If you come to us and say, hey, this challenge was okay, but I got stuck here because this doesn't make sense, we'll fix it. Maybe we'll reword the question or change it a little bit, but we will fix it. But if you don't tell us, we don't know.
Absolutely. Every time I TA Tournament 6, every time I go into the what we call the blueprint of the questions, and I change something. I add a hint, I reword something. Maybe I just add something to the TA comments. But I take player feedback. I see where people get stuck. And to your question of how you find a great challenge, we want to keep making them better as long as we can. So yeah, thanks for that great question.
Another question here. I like this question. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say, especially on the Jupiter rocket side, but also on Chris's side. What kind of so Stefan asks, what kind of monitoring are you guys running in the background during CTFs to look at the traffic, if services are up, etc.? Be brief, please. We're low on time.
Yeah, I'll try and go quickly. So we are running the Jupiter rocket ranges are running in Azure at the moment. So we're using a lot of the sort of native Azure sort of methods for gaining visibility into the systems, but we're also using some sort of service monitoring solutions. We're using a sort of suite of tools that we've bent to our will over time. That just gives us an overview of kind of what's going on within the environment, so we can see we can see whether VPNs are approaching load, we can see the number of players across instances, how services are doing, how often a box is getting knocked over, do we need to maybe stand up another one and load balance it? And that's kind of what allows us to run something like that, is having that visibility.
Yeah, we have a secret weapon named Daniel, and he does exactly those things.
Lots of scripts. Hey, folks, we're going to have to jump over to the next session, but Chris and Simon, there are some more questions for you in the hallway-Elgee-McNamee room. If you could hop in there and have a nice chat with the folks, we'd certainly appreciate that. Thank you so much. I'd like to remind everybody to fill out their eval forms for this session. I assume a link will appear shortly. There it is. And we appreciate your feedback. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Simon. You guys are awesome.